All right, our next paper is going to be Perceptions of Distributed Ledger Technology, Key Management, an interview study with finance professionals. The presenter is going to be Carolyn Guthoff from CISPA. She's a PhD student over there. Let's give a round of applause to Carolyn.
Okay, good afternoon. I want to talk to you about perceptions of distributed ledger technology, key management by finance professionals. I am guessing that you all have heard of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's original goal was to provide electronic cash that would allow online payments without going through a financial institution. Now that is interesting for two reasons. First, Bitcoin was the first working proof of concept of a blockchain. And second, it focuses on a single self-managing user. Now, Bitcoin was first used in 2009. Since then, the financial sector has developed an interest in not only cryptocurrencies, but also in the technology that they are based on, distributed ledger technology, or short DLT. And in 2021, German lawmakers allowed the electronic issuance of BIRA bonds on central registers and DLT. And since 2022, it is also possible to trade investment funds on DLT. And you'll need that information again in a second. Now remember that Bitcoin focuses on the single self-managing user. And there's been research into several topics, such as mental models of cryptocurrencies, user experience, risk perception, and security behavior. And the gist is that there exists no one-fits-all solution for key management in the single user use case. If we now apply the financial sector to these findings, we move from single self-managing users to multiple users that potentially manage high volumes and possibly customer assets. And this can amplify key management challenges. Now you might still ask yourself, why did we focus on the financial sector? Well, remember the law that I talked about briefly in the beginning, that investment funds can now be traded on DLT? That is one reason, because the usual trading of investment funds is a very intricate process that involves quite a few manual steps. A second reason is that the financial sector is highly regulated, and thus even stricter rules apply than in other sectors. Now our goal with this work was to look at perceptions of DLT key management of people working in the finance sector, with a focus on investment funds and cryptocurrencies. And we focused on the following topics. First was requirements of finance professionals regarding DLT key management. Second was security requirements from financial institutions, including finance professionals regarding DLT key management. Then we looked into attacker and threat types. And last but not least, we looked at areas of tension between requirements of finance professionals, security requirements, and technical abilities of state-of-the-art DLT. So we first interviewed 4 finance professionals about key storage in the hypothetical context of high-volume DLT-traded investment funds. This broadened our understanding of the problem space. We then reviewed and adapted our interview guideline. We did 2 major changes. So first, we shifted the focus from using distributed ledgers for trading investment funds to high-volume cryptocurrency trading within the financial sector. We did this to focus on the same environment as before, the financial sector and trading high-volume assets, while being able to ask more tangible questions. And second, we also broadened our exploration space from key storage options to key management, because a holistic approach to key management in the financial sector needs to link requirements between all parts, and key management is not only key storage. We then interviewed 9 more participants with this guideline, and we analyzed our data first via open coding and then a combination of actual and selective coding. Now let's look at the results. I'll focus on a few, but more in the paper. We'll start out with the requirements from finance professionals. And these can be separated into requirements for key usage, key storage, usability, and trust, and requirements towards financial institutions and intermediaries. So key usage requirements mostly relate to access. For example, participants described key management models that mirror hierarchies already present in their companies. They link familiar structures from their daily professional lives with potential representations of these structures in key management. For example, a supervisor should have access to more powerful keys than subordinates. As for changes in key management, participants mentioned trigger events that initialize these changes. This could be anything from an employee joining or leaving the company to key loss, key compromise, or even force majeure events like fire. And some participants also preferred solutions where key usage was invisible, for example, encapsulated in another application. As for key storage, we talked about cold and hot, as well as custodial and non-custodial key storage and combinations thereof with our participants. So cold key storage is storage that is usually not connected to the internet. For example, a key written on a paper or a key stored on a hardware security module. Hot key storage, on the other side, is usually connected to the internet, so for example, a file on a computer. Custodial storage is managed by a third party, whereas non-custodial storage is usually managed by the owners themselves. Now, a final decision on the best key storage method heavily depends on the use case. However, for example, non-custodial key storage seems like an infeasible solution for well-established financial institutions due to regulations and potential maintenance issues. In terms of usability, participants wish for usable, flexible, and easily accessible solutions, not surprising, for which few to no background knowledge is needed in order to access and use keys. Now let's move on to security requirements. We divided security requirements into 3 dimensions. We distinguished them based on how closely they are related to key management, from no relation to indirect and direct relation. We also differentiated between technical and non-technical requirements, which means whether they can be met by adapting a system or infrastructure or through a non-technical solution, for example, a regulation. Third, we distinguish between measures that could or should be taken and properties that should be met. I'll introduce a few to give you an overview. Again, more will be discussed in our paper. So backup is a technical security measure in direct relation to key management. And participants mentioned different backup options that ranged from cold storage of backups in a safe to the utilization of multi-signatures. Availability is a technical security property in direct relation to key management. Participants mentioned availability in terms of 24/7 availability, access from anywhere, and the ability of key recovery. The 4 I's principle was mentioned as a non-technical security measure in direct relation to key management. This was mentioned on the one hand as a measure of the distribution of responsibility among employees, and on the other hand as a control mechanism by the financial institution. And trust was mentioned as a non-technical security property in direct relation to key management, and this mostly referred to trust from the financial institution in the employee. Other things mentioned included security checks, audits, or know your customer, which is a money laundering prevention mechanism. Okay, moving on to attacker types, participants mentioned both internal and external perpetrators. Internal perpetrators were employees, while external ones were thieves or hackers, depending on whether they stole something physical or digital. All 3 could have had individual motives, were industry competition, or from a governmental origin. As for threats, our participants talked about different categories. An internal threat could be intentional or unintentional misuse by an employee. An external threat could be a social engineering attack targeted towards the financial institution. A systems and infrastructure threat could be a vulnerability on the blockchain. And a force majeure threat could be an electricity outage. Moving on to our last research question, we looked at areas of tension between requirements of finance requirements of finance professionals, security requirements, and technical abilities of state-of-the-art DLTs. We focused on Bitcoin and identified 2 major areas of tension: access management on Bitcoin and access management outside Bitcoin. And there are several use cases where these areas of tension arise. I will focus on signing one transaction by multiple signers. So on Bitcoin, this can be realized through an M of N multi-signature. Every signer has their own key, and it is traceable who signed a transaction if there exists a link between key pairs and natural people. However, the multi-signature has to be set up new if a trigger event happens, and they are very complex, both to set up and use, which requires expert knowledge. Now, access management outside Bitcoin for the same use case can be realized through a separate access management solution. However, this also expands the attack surface. The security is highly perceptible to the trust and security issues of its environment. So far, so good for results. Moving on to challenges that arise. Responsibility in the event of a security breach is a legal and liability challenge unique to financial institutions compared to individual users of, for example, cryptocurrencies. This can either be mitigated through technical aids such as concise and restrictive processes and applications for users, and on a non-technical side through minimum standards for precautions. On the other hand, the multi-user use case is an organizational challenge. Here, key management needs to be well-defined and control mechanisms need to be put in place, which ensure that processes are applied as intended. Last but not least, there are several directions for future research. One could compare different sectors or look at international differences of our findings. We can also recommend to test some of the hypotheses that can be derived from our work. For example, most employees prefer non-custodial key management. If you're curious to learn more, please ask a question, come find me afterwards, or read our paper. Thank you for your attention.
Questions?
Hi, thank you. Very interesting. My question is about using multiple keys. So we know from our studies that security improves literally exponentially with a growing number of keys. Do you see that knowledge even intuitively being used in the wild? Are wallet designers in fact using a larger number of keys, or is it generally just one, or a naive K out of N solution?
I don't know. I'm sorry. Yeah.
You looked at individual keys and how they are secured?
No, we looked at how key management could look like in financial institutions where multiple people have to have access to the same assets, right? We did not look at specific wallets or coin management tools. We just looked at what people think they need.
Okay, I have more questions, maybe offline. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? So just a quick question. What was the demographic detail of the population you interviewed for this?
We interviewed mostly people that work in the German jurisdiction. That's also why I said that it might be interesting to look at other international differences between our findings compared to other populations.
I'm assuming because financial rules and regulations will be significantly different from country to country, so the perceptions also might be different. And this research started because the ruling in Germany allows to trade investment funds on DLT since 2022, and I'm not aware of that being a possibility in other countries yet. Awesome.
Okay.
If there are no other questions, let's give Carolyn a round of applause.
Thank you.